So welcome, everyone. My name is Gina Arenas. I'm a program manager on the Office Extensibility team. And I'm very excited to be here today to talk about the Office 365 Unified API. In this session, I'm introducing one of the major investments on our API surfaces. It's a preview of a unified API endpoint that brings a simpler mechanism for accessing Office 365 and Azure Active Directory data. It's a single API endpoint where developers can access all the various entities across Office 365. But before I get into the session, please remember to submit your evaluations, and there's some sort of prize going around, so you don't want to miss that. OK. Today, we're going to be covering the new capabilities in this Office 365 Unified API that makes it really easy for developers to build even richer integrations with Office 365 platform and Azure Active Directory. Allows you to get access to a vast amount of data that is in Office 365, and it enables you to build awesome experiences that help users get their work done. The agenda for today is as follows. First, I'm going to go through the basic questions. So I'm going to start with, why are we investing in this new unified API endpoint? I'm going to talk about what are the capabilities that it has today, and what are the benefits that it brings to you as a developer. Then I'm going to go into how is that you can build your applications using this API. Along the way, I'm going to be showing some demos. And then I will dive into when, talking about what's supported now, what's coming in the future. And we'll end up with an awesome partner showcase and a call to action. So you've heard Satya yesterday in the keynote, and he's mentioned this before. We're very proud about it. The most strategic developer surface area for Microsoft is in Office 365. And the reason why these APIs are so important is because the data that is in Office 365, the organizational hierarchy, the calendar, the files, all those things are cornerstone for how the organizations get their stuff done. And the easier your applications can leverage all this information, the better experiences you can provide for our end users. If we take a look at Office by numbers, there's a whole lot of data in Office 365. 4 trillion emails sent within Office 365. 50 million objects in the directory, which most of them are users and groups. 60 billion attachments flowing around. 8 billion relationships calculated through the Office graph. 850 million meetings per month. That's a whole lot of data. Around 470 petabytes of data between consumer and commercial are combined within our cloud. So that brings me to the why. Well, we have all this data, but this data is actually siloed. We have data around the users, we have files, we have email and conversations, events, people, and groups. And yes, for that data is in Office 365, and for the end user experience perspective, all unified under this Office 365 umbrella. However, for the developer, the experience has some challenges. So by now, I hope you're familiar with the Office 365 APIs. We talked about them yesterday. Rob Howard gave a session about them. We launched them TechEd last year. They are great for accessing all the data, but their challenge that they have is that the APIs are still segmented by the underlying product that implements them. So oftentimes, we got feedback around, it's not easy to connect and connect the relationships that the data has. So if we wanted to, for example, to access the directory, you have to go to the Azure Directory Graph API under graph.windows.net endpoint and get the basic profile information from there. If you wanted to access extended profile properties, like things that are hosted in SharePoint online or in Exchange, like the user profile, about me, skills, interests, and things like that that are in SharePoint, or the picture, the HD picture that is stored in the user's mailbox, you'll have to go to those APIs directly. Same thing for mail, calendar, and conversations. They're underneath the Exchange service, so you'll have to go to the Exchange endpoint in order to get them. If you want to access files in OneDrive, whether they are OneDrive for Business or SharePoint, then you have to find out what is the endpoint that you have to go and interact with this, and then call that API directly. Same thing if you want to get the insights and relationships from the Office graph. So I think I frame the problem. It's all important data, but it's not really easy for the developer to get into it. It's in separate silos, and it's not easy to connect between them. So introducing this time at build, we have the unified API hosted on the graph.microsoft.com, which is basically one API to rule them all. Is where and the endpoint where you can go and access all this rich data. And there are some benefits, key benefits of the API. First one, that it exposes all of these entities through a single URL endpoint. Second, it uses the same authentication and authorization flow that all of the Office 365 APIs use, but this time around it's just a single access token. So you don't have to go and get multiple tokens for each of the individual services and talk to them. Third, it exposes the same granularly typed scope permissions to access the user data. So there is always the same protection around what the user grants access for the applications to get. It uses consistent unified metadata, consistent metadata payload, same as way as the response is just basic play JSON, and it has consistency around error handling, the libraries, and so on. It's pretty powerful, and it's a very intuitive way to access and manipulate the data. So let's see, by example, how this API is really breaking the silos of all the data that we have in Office 365. Starting with the user. I'm going to switch to hold on, let me figure this out. There you go. You saw this yesterday. The API has a way to access me, the user that is logged in. And I'm going to start switching between all the concepts that you can go and do through the API. And I'm going to show how you can get, starting with the user, to the information that is stored across multiple services. So here, what I have is just a basic web application that allows me to do the requests. I'm signing in with a Sarah D on a tenant in Office 365. And I'm going to go to that me endpoint. What I get back is the profile information from Sarah that is aggregated across the multiple services. So this time around, I don't have to call Azure Active Directory or Exchange or SharePoint directly. I can just call one endpoint and get all that information. I can do things like get my user photo, like the sign-in's user photo, from the same endpoint. And what I get back is just the same payload that you will expect, JSON that you can read, and with nice parameters that you can use to get to the actual content. I can use parameters like select to get specific properties. This one, for example, is coming from the user profile from Exchange, and I get the skills that are part of that user. So we saw how there's too many buttons here. So we saw how accessing the API, you can get to the user information, and you have a couple of options you can do through the me endpoint. I didn't quite show that you can also navigate using different things as key segment. You can do /me, or you can do /users, /the UPN of the user, or /users, /the ID. I'll show it in a minute. And, but you can get to all this profile information just through this single endpoint. Next up is the relationships. So I can get to the user's manager, the user's direct reports, and to the groups that the user is member of. And see this one again. If I go back to this, I can see just by navigating to the manager, I get the information of who's the signing user's manager. So it seems like Bonnie is Sarah's manager. I can get the list of direct reports. And as well, I can get the list of groups that this user is a member of. What I get back, it's a basically all the information of the different groups across the Office 365 that this user belongs to. So this is basically organizational structure. I can get the memberships, the hierarchy around the organization, and I can get all that data through this API. But this is mostly data that is stored in the directory, right? Now, let's look at other data that is actually not there, like messages. Messages is hosted in Exchange. So I can go to, this thing is killing me, to /messages, and show that using the same endpoint, I can get to all the different things that are in the user's inbox. I can do things like select just a few of them and use other OData operators to just filter or sort or things like that. And on the mailbox, actually, I can do some other pretty cool thing, which is I can search with just some free-form text. Let's say I'm just going to search from, and this should bring the set of emails that this user received from this other account. You can see this user right here was sent from my other account on this particular tenant. Pretty powerful thing that gives you access to all this information in the mailbox. Hold on. This doesn't work. OK. So we saw I can access messages, and I can use OData operators to just operate on the information that comes from the mailbox. So next up is events. In a similar way, I can access all the information that is in the user's calendar and go and look at things like all the events that were created on the user, or look at the calendar view of a particular time frame. This is not coming out, sorry, great. So I can look at the events. It's not there yet, great. Sorry about that. I can look at the events, or look at the particular things that are on a user's calendar view. This is basically gives me the events on a particular time frame. Good. So let's move on. Let's see if I can get this clicking accurately. Another thing that I can do is get to the user's files. And in the user's files, I can not only get to the user's files that are in OneDrive for Business, but I can also get to the files of other user OneDrive for Business and the files that I can see, either because they're shared publicly or because they are or because they've been specifically shared with that particular user. So let's look at the files. This /me files request returns me the set of files that belong to that particular user. And if I just follow the navigations to a particular file, I can get even more information about that file. I can get all the metadata, and I can even get who was the person that last modified this particular file. When I get the particular instance of the last modified user, is actually the profile information that is coming back. And I can even go further and say, well, give me who's the manager of this user that modified this particular file. So this is a pretty powerful thing that is starting from a user in the directory, then going to the files in OneDrive for Business, and then going back to the directory to get all that information from that given user. OK, the next one up is groups. With the Office 365 Unified API, you can access all the content and do management around the unified groups in Office 365. So many of you are familiar with the new groups experience. If you're not, don't miss the session. There is a session today at 3:30 that is dedicated particular to groups. And from here on, I have to caveat that the examples that I'm going to show next are not quite there deployed for everyone in production. So up to now, all the things that I've shown, you can go and use on your own tenants. But the things that I'm going to show starting next, you will be able to do just in a few weeks as our deployments roll up worldwide. So you can go to the groups and not only access what is the user's member of, but you can also access the files that belong to that particular group and get to the relationships, the conversations, and the events that are of that particular group. So let's look at that in action. So just by going to the groups collection, I get back all the list of groups that belong to this particular tenant. Here I'm logged in as Microsoft, using my corporate credentials on the Microsoft.com tenant. I can do things like, what I get back from this groups request is all the different groups, including DLs and security groups. And those don't actually have the content that I was referring before. So in order to get the particular groups that are these unified groups on Office 365, you have to do a filter. So you filter by group type. And the group type is unified. Typo. Once you get the filter of those unified groups, these are all the groups that have files and conversations and calendar and so forth. But I can also go through the Me endpoint and do a query about just the particular groups that are for that user. And again, I get not only all the groups that before I got all the groups, in this request, I get just the groups that I'm part of. I can go to the specific instance of the group and start looking at the content. Like, for example, I can look at the files of the group. I can look at the calendar via events. And same thing I can do with the conversations. And I'm just rushing up to here because there is a specific session dedicated to all the group content in 3:30 p.m. today. So what do you think? So far, so good. We have one single endpoint where you can access all this data. And not only the fixed data, but also the relationships between it. And we got calendar, we got groups, we got events, we got messages, files, and all the data that is in the directory. But here's the next level of coolness. I can also get to the insights and relationships from calculated from the Office graph. The things that I've shown before were just fixed relationships. These ones are calculated by the power of the Office graph. The Office graph is this brain in Office 365. Here's where we take all the data that is in Office 365, all the signals that we collect based on the user activity, and then process them through a whole bunch of machine learning and relevance and ranking algorithms, and calculate what are the things that are relevant for the particular user. In this case, the first one of these relationships that we're bringing up into the Office 365 Unified API is working with. Working with is a people-to-people relationship. Basically gives you who are the users that you are close with, which is your social circle, based on people that you co-author documents with, based on peers on DLs, on the recipient cache that you have on Exchange, and so forth. So we calculate this relationship based on that. So let me go back to the HDMI. And off of the Me endpoint, I can go to working with. And what I get back is the list of users that are not part of my organizational structure, but there are people that I closely work with. And not only I get back the list of users, but I can navigate directly to the profile of these users. So this particular user is in a completely different department than the department that I'm on. The next one up is trending around. Trending around is the second insight that we have incorporated into the unified API. Trending around is the documents that are relevant to you in a particular time frame. This is calculated in a similar way that we do working with, but this time is a people-to-document relationship. And we have not only the ability to access trending around for the documents for the sign-in user, but also for other users on the organization. Let's look at trending around. Here, what I'm going to get back is a list of documents in SharePoint that are relevant for a given user. So these are documents that are not only in OneDrive for Business, but also all over SharePoint. And I can navigate to the particular instances of the documents and get more information about that particular file. For example, I can go to this PowerPoint file and get to the actual file information that is coming from SharePoint. The similar thing I can do, go to get all the different properties and so forth for this particular file. Now, that's all really good stuff, and I'm going to also share a little bit of the roadmap. That's all the things that we have available today. Like I said, the things up to groups are things that you can go today and try in your own tenancy. And then the things for around groups and the insights and relationships coming from the Office Graph, they are on deployment right now, and you will be able to get them in a couple of weeks. And there is also a session around Office Graph coming later, I think it's right after this one. So you will be able to hear a little bit more about that. So next up is what we're going to have in the future. We're going to have integration for more entities around Office 365. We're going to integrate tasks, and here's a sneak peek of how the code will look like. And as well, we're going to integrate notes coming from OneNote. There is a session also around OneNote tomorrow night. So basically, all that brings us to this graph of relationships that we build in Office 365. Like I said, some of them are set, some of them are calculated, but using this single API, you have the ability to get to all this data that otherwise was being siloed by the underlying products, and just get to all that information using a single flow, all hosted under graph.microsoft.com. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how, like what is it that you can use to use how is it that you can use to build your applications on top of this API. But first, I'm going to talk about like how is it this is the same platform. This is the same Office 365 platform that you're familiar with. What we're putting here is just basically an abstraction layer. It's the same app registration, the same permission scopes and security that we have for accessing our APIs. It uses the same Auth 2.0 and OpenID Connect flows. You can use the same infrastructure. It's simpler because it is a single endpoint and it's a single access token that you have to use to access the API. And it's more powerful because it allows you to get to these connections of the data, these relationships that you were not able to get before. So as I said, underneath, there are the same interfaces that you're already familiar with, but it allows you now to traverse all these entities that are exposed to it using this unified experience, between a single API and a single token. So let's talk a little bit about how do you navigate through the API. So as I showed on the demos, you have the host, which is graph.microsoft.com. There is a version on the URL. Right now we are in preview, so we have the beta version. Then there comes the tenant. which is the Office 365 tenant customer, that domain. And then there comes the entity sets. The entity sets are they define the tenant level resource collections, like users, groups, and applications, and devices, and so forth. And then once you are in the collection, you can reference a member by the ID. And there are members of a particular type. Then those are the entity types like files, conversations, messages, events, and so forth. Then once these types like files and users and so forth, they have properties. Some of those are fixed properties like about me or skills or the last modified by of a user. And there are others that are navigation properties. These navigation properties allow me to traverse those connections between the data that is in the graph. So let's look at that in action. Try to see if I mastered my clicking here. Apparently not. So first what I'm going to do is all our code samples for Office 365 are hosted in GitHub. And in order to bring home the concept of this is the same APIs, this is just way more simpler, I'm going to go and download one of these code samples from GitHub and modify it so we can query and use the unified API against it. So I'm going to use this jQuery course example, not only to show that this is the same API, but also that the unified API endpoint supports course as well. I'm going to clone it using Git. And while that's going on, I have my GitHub repo here and open it in Visual Studio. When we upload the code samples, we don't really put all the packages, so I have to build it so that it gets all the packages from NuGet. And what that's going on, I'm going to start showing the registration of the application. So if you've developed for Office 365 before, you're familiar that you have to go through the Azure Management Portal in order to register your apps. In the Azure Management Portal, under the Azure Active Directory node, you can get to all the different applications that are part of the tenant. There are applications that the company uses, or there are applications that you're developing. And you can create one of these applications. For purposes of time, I've already pre-created one. And the only thing that has changed on this particular application is basically just the endpoint where I'm going to be receiving the requests. And then in order to configure the permissions, what you do is you come here to the Add Permissions and select Office 365 Unified API. Once you've selected, you can come here and choose the delegated permissions. For this one, we're going to, because the sample that I downloaded is just for accessing files in Office 365, I'm going to do edit or delete users' files. And I'm going to also select enable sign in for the read user profile. Then once I do the configuration of the app, I basically copy-paste the client ID and can go back to Visual Studio. Now, here in Visual Studio, this is the sample that we downloaded from GitHub. We have very simple, there is a configuration file where you have to, there is a configuration file where you basically add your domain. The domain that I'm using for this particular sample is the one that we were using before on the demos. And then I paste in the client ID. The next thing is there is a basic app.js file where you can, basically what this file does is it goes and does the authorization for you. This application is using ADAL.js. And ADAL.js makes it super easy for getting all the authorization configuration. All you have to do is pass in the endpoint that you're going to get the token for, and then just get the authentication context and get the token. The endpoint that is being passed for this particular example is the endpoint in SharePoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment that, and then I'm going to create the same variable, but again, this time around, I'm going to get a token for graph. So that's the only change that I need to do here. And then there is the actual file that is getting the different content from Office 365. It's over here. So let us see what is the changes that we need to do here in order to make this work against using the unified API endpoint. So same thing. This is the base URL that this code sample is going against. And if I just comment that and go against the graph, I can just do the same request that we were doing before against this different endpoint. The other difference is that the API there is no underscore API, and then I have to put in the right version here. So that's it. I made just 3 edits to this particular project that was working against OneDrive for Business, the OneDrive for Business API. And then I'm going to run it against the unified API. This particular sample is using OpenID Connect, so I just go through login. Let's see. Great, I missed something else. OK. It seems I need to be skipping this one because I'm not sure I'm not going to debug it on stage. Let's go back to the presentation. OK. So the idea of the demo was to show you that the same API works against both, but I don't know what happened with the authentication there. But you can basically download that sample, make the simple changes, and run it against the same API. The same API works against the same information that you get it back. You get it in the same format, and then your code will just work against the unified endpoint. So let's talk about what is supported now. So we have seen that there's a lot of functionality. And we have users, files, mail, calendar, organizational contacts. I mentioned about groups and social activity. I have them with a little asterisk here because they're going under deployment. And then we also have support right now for commercial properties and supporting auth 2.0, CORS, CRUD, the common basic OData operations. And there are also actions and functions like send mail or accept a calendar event and so forth are supported. And then we have client libraries for .NET, Android, and iOS. And if you want to go and check out what are the different entities that are supported and what are the different properties that the API has, and all of the properties that I mentioned before, like properties and navigation properties, you can check out the metadata endpoint of the API. I'm going to try the next demo. Hopefully, this one goes better. Here, what I have here is, in this demo, I'm going to build up Win8 app. This one is basically just, let me show you. I've built a very basic UI that binds the data that I get back from the API. So I have a little button here that starts the authentication flow, and then a little form here that lets me bind the data that I get back from different calls. If I go to SAML, I just see that I'm just using a whole bunch of text blocks to bind the data. And then in this, in the main file, what I have here is basically start with adding the contacts, which is the client ID, the redirect URI, and then the resource string that I'm going to use to get the token. In my main function, all I have here is initializing the authentication context. And then I have the little button, which basically just calls this function. In the function, I get one single line of code to get the access token because I'm using the .NET ADAL library. And this is to print it out. And then I'm going and initializing that client context, passing in the access token getter. This is all I need to do to get that client context. In order to make a couple of requests, a couple of GET requests, I'm going to bring in this code. Basically, what I do here is I call that client context and execute the query async to get me, and I get the properties, and I bind it to the particular table that we saw before. And then I do other three queries, which is getting the top files, the top mail, the messages from the inbox, and then the top 5 users from the organization. So as you can see, this one is very, very short lines of code that allows you to just get all that data from across the multiple services. It is like 10 lines of code, and before it would have been like probably hundreds. And up to now, I've shown that you can do a lot of gets with the API, but also CRUD is supported. So you can also create files, create events, send messages, and so forth. And I'm going to add the code a little here in order to create a new event. This one is a little bit longer, but because I'm just setting all the properties for this particular event, and one single request to create the event async allows me to do that event creation. So I'm going to run that. Let me add a couple of breakpoints here so we can take a look at the information coming in. One error. What? OK, I'm not sure what happened here. I'm just going to go through another version where I have that is working. And look at that one. This one is the same. OK, this one is the same project I just had. The same project that we just built. This one, I'm just sure is working. So let's run that. I'm getting the same error. Well, the demo gods are not cooperating with me today. And both of my demos have failed. That's pretty epic. Line 19, great. It's complaining because of the title. Let's remove the title. We're going to have a title-less demo, but still a demo. and look at this main page over here. 200 is way too much. I'm going to add the same breakpoints that we talked about before to look at the user files. I'm going to start with connecting to this application here. What this is going to do is going to go to is going to go through the authorization flow. So I'm going to sign in as the user here. And then what is going to go and get an access token. This is the access token that we printed before. And then it's going to go and make the request to the API. It's going to go and get the user information. It's going hitting the me endpoint and getting back all the information about the particular user. Then it's going to go and get the top 5 files, the top 5 messages, and then the top 5 users. And the last, which I didn't have a query for, is creating an event on the user's calendar. So let's go and check that out. Discuss new project. This is the event that was just created using the demo. Okay. So what's coming next? Here's the roadmap for where we're taking the unified API. We are adding notifications and like webhooks type support in the next few months, and where you're going to get the capability to register for events that are on the multiple entities supported by the API. We're going to go and add support for consumer as well. And we're going to get instant on. Right now, when you create a group, the ability to access the content of the group is not instantaneously. So it takes a little bit of time to replicate across the multiple services. So we're going to go and close that gap. We're going to add personal contacts. The contacts that are supported on the API today are just organizational contacts. We're going to add tasks, notes, and information coming from Skype, additional insights and relationships from the Office Graph, and extensibility. And to see a little sneak peek of what is coming on this area, I'll suggest that you join the 3:30 session on Office Graph. And then I'm going to now ask Alex to join me on stage with some awesome demo that he has. We've partnered with Smartsheets, and during the last couple of weeks, they built some awesome thing that he's going to show next.
5. Hey, thanks for having me, Ina. I hope that the demo gods are going to be with me today. So Smartsheet has been in the business of helping our customers with project management for the last 8 years. And project management is really hard because our customers are constantly inundated with new information, and they need to be able to cut through the noise to actually be able to make decisions quickly, right? So we set out to reimagine the traditional project management experience to make it more intuitive, more user-centric, and more visual. Right? So the Smartsheet work map is a way to easily see the work that's being done, but also the people that are driving it across the organization. It's based on the actual activity that's taking place in Smartsheet, but it presents it in a very visual way. So let's say I'm a member of the Smartsheet marketing team, and I'm responsible for all the case studies that we have going on. So what I have here at a glance are all the projects that I'm working on, as well as the people I'm collaborating with. So the color indicates status. It's the health of the project. Green means they're fine. I don't have to worry about them. The red, however, the Kentosa project, appears to be in trouble, so I have to figure out what's going on. So here is where the integration with the unified Office API really comes into play and helps the work map to surface not only the information about the project that we have in Smartsheet, but also bring in all the related information from Office, like my emails, my calendar events, my files. So also what I have here going for you guys is a log of all the requests that we're making to the Office API to retrieve some of that information. And I'll walk through that. The first thing you'll notice is that the people that were on the bottom who are collaborating on the Contoso case study been regrouped by department. So Smartsheet knows how people are connected to their work, but it has no notion of department affiliation because we don't store that information. But it's through the integration with the unified API, we're able to retrieve the information about the user's departmental affiliation, and we know where they are in the organization. And it helps me as the user in the end to make sure that I've got the right people working on this case study with me. At the top, you've got the carousel, which combines the information that we get about the project from Smartsheet with the information that we've been able to retrieve from Office. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to look at the project summary I have from Smartsheet. Using the Smartsheet visual columns, I can quickly determine where the project is stuck. And that appears to be the ROI summary section. So I see that's that specific task has been assigned to Jamie. And I would expect to have received some email from Jamie explaining what the issue is. So I want to be able to dig into my email, see if there's anything that pops up. So I'm going to scroll over to my inbox. And the work map is context aware, so I can instantly filter my inbox based on emails that came from Jamie. So the way we do it is by making a call to the graph endpoint messages and scoping it to Jamie's address and grabbing a bunch of email metadata just to keeping the presentation light, but enough for it to be actionable. So indeed, I see there is an email from Jamie relevant to that conversation, the set of issues around their ROI. And the next thing I want to do, I want to check my files, because I would also expect there is a recent version, the draft of the case study in my OneDrive. Okay, so all I have to do is scroll over to my documents. And again, through the unified API, WorkMap reaches into OneDrive and does a scoped call, as you can see here, on the file's endpoint, filters it based on the file name that contains Contoso, and brings up the list of all the files in my OneDrive that are related to the case study. And sure enough, at the top of the list, I've got a recent draft that's got notes related to the issues around the ROI. So I'll need to dig into that one. But while I'm at it, I also want to set up an appointment with Jamie so we can sort through all the issues and get it all done. So I'm going to scroll over to my calendar events. And again, here's where we make call through the unified API to the events endpoint. And we filter it based on the subject of the event to figure out which ones are related to the Contoso. I want to make sure I'm aware of what's going on. And I can see that Jamie's actually beat me to it. There's a meeting that's set for Monday, and that we'll have an opportunity to sort all the issues then. So it's really like one example that we can harness the power of integration with the Office Unified API to create these contextually rich, powerful scenarios that can help our joint customers actually get their work done.
Thank you, Alex. It's awesome. One little thing that Alex didn't mention is that it actually took them around 2 weeks to implement this thing. We started around 2 weeks ago to work with them, and it was pretty awesome how fast they were able to execute. And they have a pretty heavy UI, as you saw in there. So now I'm going to, with a call to action, what you can do right now after you leave this room. You can go to dev.office.com/unified APIs and get all the information of the unified endpoint. There are 2 ways in which you can try and play with the API right now. One is using the API sandbox, which is an awesome way to try out some code. I'm going to show it. And there is the Graph Explorer, the one that I showed in the demos at the beginning of the session. You can get the client libraries. We have client libraries available in .NET, iOS, and Android. And there's sample code on GitHub that already uses the Unified API on getting, again, sample code on the same platforms. And there is full documentation on MSDN around the preview that we have right now. So let me show a little bit of the API sandbox. API Sandbox is hosted on apisandbox.microsoft.com. And basically, it provides you a very easy way to get to multiple code samples. You don't need to have a tenant in Office 365 in order to come here and get some request going. If you go to the code samples node, it will have code both in C# and JavaScript on how to make multiple requests. So I can go to, for example, to the get messages. And if I go to JavaScript, I see that they're making an HTTP web request to this endpoint. I can execute it right there and get back all the data. I can execute it right there and get back all the data from that particular request. On this one. This one is messages. So I get all the messages, and I can tweak the code right here and run it just to make sure that I'm getting the right requests and the right response back. And there is a very easy way for you to try with the API without the need of having an Office 365 tenant. OK, so I'm heading towards the end. In summary, we have this awesome API, Office 365 Unified API. It's a single API for all of Office entities, and there's 3 key points to take away. This API makes it super easy to get to all of the data that is in Office 365. It breaks the product barriers and allows you to navigate between all these siloed services. And then it combines the insights that are coming from the Office graph. So you can not only get all these set relationships, but I can also get the calculated relationships that we even use today to power the Delph experience. There are some related sessions that you don't want to miss. And I will also make a note on the Developer Program Launch. If you haven't done this already, make sure you sign up. They're going to be sending out email. There's an email newsletter, a free developer subscription for Office 365 for 1 year. There's some perks around tools that you're getting for free as well as trainings and webinars. And you've seen this on the Office booth. Make sure you sign up for it, check out the Express Talks, and collect all your different goodies on the booth. With that, I'm going to open up for questions. If you want, any questions? If you're going to have a question, I will ask you, please speak up your question in the microphone, and then.
Yeah. Okay. Hello. So basically, we just wanted to know the unified APIs, does it support the application level access? Like if you have a daemon service running, is it possible to use that?
Not right now. It's part of the roadmap.
OK.
Mm-hmm. Right now, it's delegated access. OK? Make sure to evaluate this session. Your feedback is super valuable. And we'll see you guys next time.